The ballroom looked exactly the way my son-in-law had described it when he first proposed the idea. Warm light, round tables draped in ivory linen, the kind of place where people lower their voices just walking in. I remember standing at the entrance for a moment, taking it all in, thinking that maybe, just maybe, we'd finally gotten something right as a family. Then my daughter tapped the microphone and everything changed. She was glowing. 29 years old, dressed in a blush gown that cost more than my first car, and she looked out at the room full of people I'd spent the better part of 2 years helping to impress. She smiled. She thanked her new husband's family. She thanked her bridesmaids. She thanked her mother. Then she made a joke about me. It wasn't long. That's the thing about cruelty. It doesn't need to be. A sentence and a half. Something about how her stepfather had always been more of a checkbook than a dad. And she laughed while she said it, the way you laugh when you want the room to know it's okay to laugh too. And they did. The whole room laughed. I sat at table 7, not the family table, I should mention, that detail matters, and I felt the sound of it like something physical. My wife, seated next to me, did not look at me. She laughed into her champagne flute, a small laugh almost private, like she was laughing at a memory she'd been carrying for years. My son-in-law was the only person in that room who didn't laugh. I noticed that. He was sitting at the head table, and he went very still, and he looked at me across the room with an expression I'll never forget. Not pity, exactly. More like recognition, like he suddenly understood something important about the family he just married into. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back. My wife and I met when I was 44. She was 41, divorced, with a 12-year-old daughter and a life that had clearly been harder than she'd let on in those first few months of dating. I didn't mind. I'd had my own difficult years. I understood what it looked like to hold things together with duct tape and good intentions. We got married 2 years later. Her daughter, I'll call her my daughter now because that's how I thought of her, that's the word I used in my head, was 14. Old enough to be skeptical of me. Young enough that I thought with time things could be different. I tried. That's the part of the story that people who weren't there won't fully understand. I genuinely tried. I showed up to her school plays even when my wife couldn't make it. I learned to cook the pasta dish she liked, the one with the roasted red peppers, and I made it on bad days without being asked. When she got into a good university in Boston, first in her family, I cried in the car on the way home. Not because I was sad, because I was proud in a way I hadn't expected to feel. I paid her tuition, all 4 years. That wasn't a grand gesture, I announced over dinner. It was just what needed to happen, and I was in a position to make it happen, so I did. After graduation, she moved back to the area. She got a job. She met a man, I'll call him my son-in-law, who worked in engineering and seemed, from the first time we had dinner together, like someone with a genuine moral center. He was quiet. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He was the kind of person you trust instinctively. He proposed 18 months later. My daughter called me, not my wife, me, to tell me. She was crying happy tears, the breathless kind. She said, "We're going to need your help, Dad." That was the word she used, Dad. I wrote it down in the journal I keep on my nightstand. I'm not ashamed of that. The wedding planning started immediately. My wife handled most of the coordination. That was fine. Weddings are her world in a way they've never been mine, and I trusted her judgment. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly the budget conversations stopped including me while the invoice conversations continued to find me just fine. The venue alone was $42,000. That number still sits in my chest when I think about it. Not because of the money. I'd built a successful small business over 30 years, and I'd been careful with what I earned, but because it was the first number in a long line of numbers, and nobody ever asked if that was okay. They told me. "We're doing the Harrington estate," my wife said one evening, the way you'd say we're having chicken for dinner. "The deposit is due Friday." I wrote the check. Then there was the catering upgrade. Then the photographer my daughter had found, a destination photographer who required a travel fee. Then the florist, because the original florist had a vibe that felt off. Then the string quartet, because the DJ they'd booked wasn't really the feel they were going for anymore. I kept a running total in a spreadsheet I never showed anyone. By the time the wedding was 6 weeks out, we were past $80,000 and climbing. I want to be honest about something. I never said no. Part of that was love, genuine love for my daughter and the life she was building. But part of it, and I've had a lot of time to sit with this, was that I had spent 15 years trying to earn something from this family that I could never quite name. Acceptance, maybe, or just the basic sense that my presence mattered as much as my usefulness. So I kept writing checks. 3 weeks before the wedding, my son-in-law called me. Not to ask about money. He called to ask how I was doing. We talked for 40 minutes about baseball and his grandmother's health and a trip I'd taken to Montana the previous summer. At the end of the call, he said, "I just want you to know. She's lucky to have you. I hope she knows that." I didn't know what to say. I thanked him and hung up and sat with that for a long time. The morning of the wedding was complicated in the way that only high-production events can be. 100 small emergencies that feel enormous until they don't. A floral arrangement that arrived in the wrong shade. A seating chart misprint. I handled 3 different phone calls before 9 in the morning while my wife had her hair done and my daughter was in her suite with her bridesmaids. Nobody asked me to handle those calls. I just did, because I was there and things needed handling. The ceremony itself was at 2 in the afternoon. It was genuinely beautiful. My son-in-law cried when he saw my daughter come down the aisle. I stood next to my wife in the third pew and watched a man who loved my daughter completely and without reservation make a promise to her in front of everyone they knew. I thought this was worth it, all of it. We moved to the ballroom for the reception. Cocktail hour, past appetizers, the whole production. I shook hands with people whose names I didn't know and accepted congratulations and answered, "Yes, I'm so proud of her," approximately 40 times. Dinner was served. Speeches began. My wife's mother went first, a long, rambling tribute that circled back 3 times to the fact that her granddaughter had her grandmother's eyes and her grandmother's spirit. Then 2 bridesmaids, warm and funny. Then my son-in-law's best man, who gave a genuinely good speech that made everyone laugh and then quietly teared up at the end. Then my daughter took the microphone. I sat up a little straighter. I'll admit it, I was hoping. Maybe that's the thing I should be most honest about. I was sitting there at table 7, away from the family table, and I was hoping that some part of what I'd given this family over 15 years might be acknowledged. Not celebrated, not turned into a monument, just acknowledged. She talked about her mother. She talked about her grandmother. She talked about how her husband had shown her what love was supposed to look like. Then she said it. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my stepfather. She smiled at the room. He always knew how to show up, especially when the bill arrived. Laughter. I used to joke with my mom. What does he actually do around here besides pay for things? More laughter. She shook her head like it was all very fond and funny. I'm kidding, kind of. The room was still chuckling when she moved on to thanking the venue coordinator. I looked at my wife. She had her hand over her mouth, but it wasn't covering horror. It was covering a smile. She caught my eye and gave me a small shrug, the kind that means, "What did you expect? It's just a joke. Don't make this about you." I looked at table 1, at my son-in-law. He was not laughing. He was looking at me with something careful and steady in his expression. And then he looked at my daughter, and something shifted in his face. He reached over and put his hand gently on her wrist as she passed him on the way to her seat, and I heard him say something low and quiet that I couldn't make out. Whatever it was, she didn't like it. Her smile flickered. He stood up. He didn't ask for the microphone. He simply stood, and the room, curious now, quieted on its own. He was 6'2" and calm in the way that people who are genuinely sure of themselves are calm. He picked up his champagne glass. "I'd like to add something," he said, "if everyone doesn't mind." The room waited. "I've been watching my father-in-law tonight." He looked directly at me. Not toward me, at me. "And I want to say something that I don't think has been said, so I'm going to say it now, in front of everyone here, because I think it needs to be witnessed." My wife had gone very still beside me. "This man paid for every element of what you experienced today. The room you're sitting in, the food you just ate, the flowers on your table, the music, all of it. He didn't announce it. He didn't ask for credit. He just did it, because that's the kind of man he is." He paused, and he's been doing that for a long time, long before tonight. He raised his glass. "To a man who gave everything to build something for this family. I'm proud to know you, sir. I hope you know your presence here matters, not your checkbook. You." A few people started to clap, then more. By the end, it was most of the room, a little uncertain, a little moved, the way people get when something honest breaks through into a moment that had started to go somewhere else. I nodded at him. That was all I could manage. My daughter was looking at the tablecloth. My wife said quietly, "That was unnecessary." I didn't respond. The rest of the evening moved the way receptions do. Toasts and dancing and cake cutting and 100 small rituals that everyone performs because the alternative is sitting with what just happened. I smiled when smiling was required. I danced once with my wife, a slow song near the end of the night, and we didn't speak during it. Before the guests left, my son-in-law found me near the bar. He'd loosened his tie. He looked tired in the way people look when they've been running on adrenaline all day. "I'm sorry," he said. "That should have been said before tonight, by someone else." "You don't need to apologize," I told him. "You didn't do anything wrong." He looked at me for a moment. "Are you okay?" I thought about that. The honest answer was no, but not in the way he might have expected. I wasn't devastated. I wasn't even angry in any sharp, hot way. I was something quieter and heavier than that. I was tired of explaining my own value to people who'd already decided what I was for. "I think I'm done," I said. He nodded slowly, like he understood exactly what I meant. I said goodnight to a few people. I hugged my daughter. She held on a second longer than I expected, and I don't know what that meant. I've thought about it since. I said goodbye to my wife's mother, who had not registered that anything unusual had happened. I got my coat. I drove home alone. My wife had told me earlier she was staying with her mother that night to help with some of the post-wedding logistics. I said that was fine. I meant it. I sat in the kitchen for a while. It was past midnight. The house was the way houses get when they've been empty all day, a little stale, a little strange. I made coffee I didn't need and sat at the table and looked out at the backyard, at the maple tree I'd planted the year after my wife and I got married. It was big now. You forget, over 15 years, how much things grow. I opened my laptop. Not because I had anything to do, just because the silence felt like it needed filling. I pulled up the spreadsheet, the running total. $84,600. 14 years of school fees and car repairs and a bedroom renovation my daughter had wanted before she left for college, deposits and balances and final invoices, the whole quiet ledger of a life I'd built inside someone else's family. I looked at it for a long time. Then I closed it. Not because the numbers didn't matter. They did, in the way all honest reckonings matter. But they weren't the thing I'd been mourning that night, sitting at table 7, listening to my daughter make the room laugh at my expense. The money was never the point. The point was the 15 years behind the money, the plays and the pasta and the phone calls from Boston and the word Dad written in a journal on my nightstand, and the fact that when the moment came to say something true about me in front of everyone, The truest thing my daughter could think to say was that I was useful. That's what I was to her, useful. I slept badly. In the morning I called my son-in-law, not my daughter, not yet, and I thanked him. He said, "You don't have to thank me for telling the truth." I said, "I know, I'm thanking you anyway." He said my daughter was upset, not at him, or at least not only at him. More, I think, at herself, at the thing she'd done that she couldn't quite walk back once it was out in the room. He thought she might call. She did call 2 days later. It was a hard conversation, the kind where there's no villain and no clean resolution, just two people sitting with the distance between them and trying to figure out if there's a way across. She said she didn't mean for it to land the way it landed. I told her it landed the way it landed because of what it was. She cried. I didn't. I was too tired for it. We didn't fix everything in that phone call. I don't think you can fix 15 years of something in a single phone call. But I told her what I'd never quite managed to say out loud, that I had always thought of her as my daughter, not my wife's daughter, not my stepdaughter, mine, and that what had hurt me most wasn't the joke. It was that she'd had the microphone and the whole room in the perfect moment, and she'd used it to tell everyone what I was for. She was quiet for a while. "I didn't know you felt that way," she finally said. I told her that was the other problem. My wife and I are still sorting things out. That's the most accurate way I can put it. There have been conversations, some of them useful, some of them circular. She thinks I'm holding on to the moment longer than necessary. I think she doesn't fully understand what the moment cost me. We are, for now, living in the space between those two things, which is maybe where a lot of long marriages quietly live. What I know is this. I am 63 years old. I have built a business, raised a child who wasn't born to me, and written more checks than I could count for people I loved without condition. I am not interested at this point in my life in performing my own value for anyone. My son-in-law texted me last week. He and my daughter are back from their honeymoon. He asked if I wanted to come over Sunday for dinner. "Nothing fancy," he wrote. "I'm making pasta." I told him I'd be there. I don't know what comes next. With my daughter, with my wife, with the version of this family that exists now on the other side of that evening. But I know I'll pull into their driveway on Sunday and walk through the door, and that matters in a way I can't entirely explain. Not because I need to, because I want to. Because underneath all of it, underneath the spreadsheet and the seating chart and the joke that landed wrong in a ballroom full of people, there is still love. Complicated and imperfect and sometimes infuriating, but love. That part I'm not done with yet. I've been thinking about that maple tree in the backyard. I planted it the year my wife and I got married, when I still believed that love was mostly about showing up and letting time do the rest. It's tall now. Taller than I expected when I put it in the ground. And I think about how I never once stood over it asking it to grow faster or demanding that it acknowledge what I'd done for it. I just watered it. I just stayed. That's what I did with my daughter too. And for a long time I told myself that was enough. What I understand now, and I wish I'd understood it 20 years earlier, is that patience without honesty isn't virtue. It's avoidance. I kept quiet about what I needed from this family, not because I was strong, but because I was afraid that if I asked for something, I'd find out the answer was no. So I made myself useful instead. I wrote the checks. I handled the calls. I showed up at the door with pasta and pride and the quiet hope that someone would eventually notice. Nobody ever does when you make it that easy not to. My son-in-law noticed. And what strikes me about what he did, standing up in that ballroom, raising his glass, saying the thing that nobody else had thought to say, is that it wasn't impulsive. It came from somewhere clear and settled in him. He'd looked at our family and understood something about it that the rest of us had stopped being able to see. That took a kind of wisdom that isn't taught in any classroom. It's the wisdom of paying attention to what's actually true, instead of what's convenient. I've spent 63 years learning that integrity isn't a feeling. It's a decision you make in the moment, when it costs you something. My son-in-law made that decision in front of 200 people, knowing my daughter would be upset, knowing the room had already moved on. He did it anyway. That's not performance, that's character. And my daughter, I don't say this to condemn her. I say it because it's the most honest thing I can offer. She's going to have to sit with what she did. Not because I'm waiting for an apology, though she gave one, but because the hardest work any of us ever do is looking clearly at the moments when we chose convenience over truth and deciding to do differently next time. That's not punishment. That's just how people actually grow. You don't get to skip it. Neither do I. Because I have my own accounting to do. I let 15 years pass without once saying clearly, this is who I am to you, this is who I am to you, this is what I need you to see. I called that patience. It wasn't. It was a failure of nerve dressed up as generosity. Real generosity doesn't hide. It names itself. It shows up and says, I am here, I love you, and that love deserves to be seen plainly. I'm driving over Sunday. My son-in-law is making pasta. My daughter will probably be nervous, and I will probably be tired, and we will sit around a table and figure out slowly how to be honest with each other going forward. That's the work. I'm not too old for it. I'm just old enough to know it's the only work that matters.